Welcome back to another enlightening episode of The Truth About the Plant, the show that takes you on a journey through the world of psychoactive plants and alternative wellness, all while delivering real, actionable insights you crave. I'm your host, Christina Dees. This is my equally talented co-host, Dr. Amanda Ryman. We show up every week to deliver to you in 20 minutes or less the truth about the plant. Dr. Ryman, why do we do that? Why are we here?
Well, we're here because there are so many questions out there about cannabis. How to use it safely, how to avoid problems, how to talk to it about it with your friends and loved ones. And let's face it, it's really hard to get good evidence-based information about cannabis on the internet. Not only is it censored on most social platforms, but you might Google a question or ask ChatGPT and you might get 100 different answers back. Many of them completely contradict each other. So how are you supposed to know what is the truth? Well, that's where we come in. We are here to answer your most pressing questions about cannabis in about 20 minutes or less every week so that you can get the information you need and get on with your day. You can think of us as your really cool aunties or your kick-ass granddaughters, the women in your life who will always tell you the truth.
Have you ever walked past a shelf of cannabis creams, balms, and lotions and thought, do these actually work? Well, you are not alone. Today, we're going to dive into the world of cannabis topicals, what they are, how they work, and do they actually work? So, Dr. Ryman, we've discussed a lot of methods of consumption on this show, but one we have not yet touched on isn't as sexy because it doesn't get you high. We're talking about cannabis topicals, also known as salves, bombs, and topicals are one of the oldest methods for ingesting cannabis. You know, thousands of years, people have been using the plant to make their poultices and other compounds and applying it directly to the skin. So let's dive deeper into topicals. You know, how are they made? Can you make them at home? How are they used? And the most important question, do they actually work?
Well, I'm really glad we're covering topicals because cannabis is a very powerful therapeutic tool, but not everyone enjoys or wants the side effect of getting high. You may have things you got to do, places you got to go, people you got to see, and yet your knee hurts or your wrist hurts or you have arthritis in your fingers. So, topicals are a great way to address some of these aches and pains and inflammation without the added side effect of psychoactivity. Before we dive in, I do want to differentiate between topical application and transdermal application because they both go in through the skin and sometimes people get confused about which is which. So, topicals infuse cannabinoids into the skin and muscular layer only. So, these are things like rubbing on a lotion or a balm or a salve. Transdermal application, which is usually through a patch, transdermals introduce cannabinoids into the bloodstream. So if you think about patches for other things like pain relievers, right? They have fentanyl patches and other types of patches. Nicotine patches is another really good example of transdermal application. So when you put a nicotine patch on, that nicotine's getting into your bloodstream. It's not just getting into your skin or your muscle. That's what it's supposed to do because it's supposed to be a substitute for inhaling the nicotine from a cigarette. So transdermal application does get into the bloodstream. It does go to the brain. Topical application does not get into the bloodstream, does not go into the brain, and basically just gets into the skin and into the muscles. So I want to make sure that we're differentiating those things. So the cannabinoids and topicals are just introduced into the dermis layer or skin and the muscles. And so again, this is really key when we start talking about what conditions topical applications of cannabinoids are good for versus something like transdermal application or edible or oral ingestion.
Okay, well, speaking of the types of conditions, I know pain is the most common for medical cannabis. So, how can topicals be used for pain?
Well, first, I want to just point out that because topicals do not enter the bloodstream, they will not show up on a drug test. I think people have that question a lot. If you are administering a topical, you're rubbing it on your skin, those cannabinoids are not getting into your bloodstream, which means they will not show up on a drug or urine test. However, if you are soaking in a tub where you have used a cannabis bath bomb, which is a thing, and you put it in the tub and you've been soaking in the tub for a couple hours, it is possible that those cannabinoids are going to make their way into your bloodstream. One way they may do that is from what we talked about a couple shows ago on menopause. They may get up through your vaginal canal, and there they have direct access to your bloodstream. So that's the caveat. Topicals will not show up on a drug test. However, if you do soak in an infused water, like in a bath, then all bets are off. And it is possible that one, you could have that show up on a drug test, and two, you could get high from that because that is actually entering the bloodstream. So just some info there, because I know that people a lot of times are concerned about what's to show up.
So is that for men and women or just women? Because men don't have a vaginal entry.
No, but we all have anuses.
I just wanted to ask because
Yeah,
I don't want any men to soak in the tub and then say, "Hey, I thought we were good."
we all have portals into the bloodstream. For women, it's our anus and our vaginal canal. For men, it is the anus. I'm trying to think if cannabinoids would get up through the urethra. Probably not, but they're tiny. So maybe. So if you are a man or a woman, male parts or female parts, and you are soaking in a tub with cannabinoid infused water, just be aware that some of that water may make its way up inside you through various places and ways and pathways. Okay, so let's get back to the conditions for which topicals are good. You asked about pain. So pain is one of the best things that you can use topicals for. Now, a few episodes ago, if people are interested, we did talk about CBD and skincare. So using cannabinoids in skincare is another topical application, right? So we talked about using CBD for things like lines in the face, sagging, redness, inflammation. We talked about it in relation to some diseases of the skin like psoriasis. All of these things are topical applications. So that is one area that there's a lot of promise in the use of topicals that are infused with CBD. Because topicals have cannabinoids in them, they go into just the skin and the muscle. They're going to be good when it comes to pain for what we call localized pain versus neuropathic pain. So localized pain is coming from inflammation and soreness in the muscles or abrasions of the skin. So for this type of pain, introducing cannabinoids into the skin and into the muscles will impact pain directly at the site, right? So for example, if I hit my knee on the table, which I do far too often, given that I know where the table is and I know where my knee is, and yet I'm constantly hitting my knee on the table, it becomes swollen and painful. So applying a cannabis topical directly to that area can reduce inflammation and help quell pain, because that pain is from that specific part of my body getting inflamed and sore as a response to the trauma, right? So that's when we talk about topicals, that's localized pain. Now, the other type of pain is neuropathic pain. And this is when the pain is caused by the signaling of the brain. And in this case, topicals are not going to be useful. So if my brain is sending out a signal for my leg to hurt, but I haven't hit my leg on anything, it's just my brain sending a pain signal to my leg, rubbing a topical on my leg is not going to do anything, because those cannabinoids are entering the skin and the muscle where there isn't any problem, but it's not doing anything to impact the signaling in my brain. So when we talk about neuropathic pain, we really need those cannabinoids to bind to the receptors in the brain in order to impact that signaling. So going back to those transdermal patches, when we're actually allowing cannabinoids to enter the bloodstream, those have been shown to ease neuropathic pain. But when we're talking about topicals, we're really talking about, oh, my joints are swollen, I hurt my knee, I stubbed my toe, I pulled a muscle. Those are the types of pain conditions that are going to be most helped by topicals.
Okay, so transdermals for neuropathic pain and swollen joints, inflammation, sore muscles, topicals. Okay, let's talk about how they're made, because this can be confusing.
Yeah, well, similarly to tinctures, love tinctures. The process of making topicals involves infusing cannabis into a carrier medium. So with tinctures, that's usually stuff like alcohol or oil, like MCT oil. With topicals, the medium is usually an oil base, like coconut oil, but other mediums can be used as well. The key is that cannabinoids infuse better into fat-based mediums than water-based mediums. So, like tinctures, the goal is for the cannabinoids to be evenly distributed through the product so that you're getting the same amount of cannabis with each serving. So, if you have like a jar of a topical, and let's say it's infused into some coconut oil, you don't want part of that jug to be really strong and part of that jug to be really weak. You want the cannabinoids to be evenly distributed throughout the entire product that you're using.
So I make my own can of butter and oils at home. Are topicals something that you can make at home? It sounds like you can do that if the same medium is there, but does it work? Yeah.
No, absolutely. So I used to make can of butter at home, but I would make can of coconut oil instead of using butter. I would use coconut oil. I would infuse it. I would pour it into molds, make sticks out of it, and then use it to cook with. So you can absolutely do that exact same thing for topicals. Coconut oil is great for the skin. You can make infused coconut oil. You can make it harden. You can put it in a mold or in a jar and then just pull that out and use that as a cannabis topical. So, yes, you can absolutely make topicals at home. We actually do have a recipe for topicals on the Personal Plants website. But one thing I will say is that, like making edibles at home, there's a certain amount of quality control, right? I mean, I would make edibles at home sometimes. Now, granted, I was using can of butter that I made with a machine. So the hope is that it's evenly distributed throughout that block of coconut oil. But it's not, it's a science, right? It's not necessarily an art. So you have to really know what you're doing in order to get that product evenly distributed. Now, if we're talking about edibles, the risk is that one of your brownies has 5 milligrams of THC and another one of your brownies has like 20 milligrams of THC based on different concentrations throughout your butter product. But if you're using topicals and making them at home, the biggest risk is really that you're going to get some topical that isn't effective at all because you're not really going to overdose on topicals, right? So this is important. You're not going to overdose on topicals because they're not going to get you high. So really the biggest risk with topicals is that it's not good enough, that there's not enough cannabinoids in the product that you're using in order to impact your symptoms.
Yeah. So do you know if we need a higher amount of cannabinoids for topical pain or like pain inflammation on the skin or
No,
just regular, just like
I
you
mean,
eating it?
yeah, it's just like everything else with cannabis. Everybody's bodies are different. Every trauma is different, right? So if I have something like chronic pain due to arthritis, where I have very swollen joints, which I actually do have in my feet, my toe joint gets super huge and super painful. I may require a higher concentration of cannabinoids than somebody that's using it because they bumped their knee and now it's a little bit swollen, but it's already feeling better. So I would say that it really is about finding the right product for you and making sure that the product you're using is well made so that you know you're getting an even amount of concentration of cannabinoids throughout.
Okay, well, this brings me to my last question, and I go to bat for this all the time because I do know the skin is a hard layer to penetrate unless you have something helping get in there. So, my question to you is: do topicals actually work?
Yes, the final yet complicated question. So, kind of in what you just said about getting into the skin, that's kind of the first step, right? So, the topical has to be made in a way and with a medium where it's actually going to penetrate the skin. And so that part is really important. And all lotions, balms, salves that are already out there are formulated so that they break through that skin layer and actually get into the skin. So as long as the topicals are made the same way and are made like any other lotion or balm or salve, then it should get into the skin. But as we discussed, topicals are non psychoactive. So whether or not they're effective can be a little bit subjective. And it really depends on symptoms. So when you talk about inflammation, this is something you can see, right? You can see that your knee is swollen and you can see if the swelling goes down. So if you're have a swollen knee and you put a topical on it and 10 minutes later the swelling seems to have subsided a little bit, then you can be pretty sure that it was because of the topical. If you have a swollen knee and you apply a topical and you ice it, and then the swelling goes down, it's like, well, was it the topical? Was it the ice? Was it a little bit of both? If you use a topical and use ice and take ibuprofen, then the cause and effect blurs even more. And because you're not feeling the effects, like the psychoactivity of the effects, it can be tough to know if it really is the topical that is responsible, right? So it's a little bit hard to know about cause and effect. Pain, on the other hand, you can't see, but it's highly subjective and vulnerable to the placebo effect. And pain is also time dependent, right? So, meaning that localized pain usually subsides with time. If I go back to the example of hitting my knee on the table, there's a burst of pain and then soreness, which subsides over time. So if I apply a topical and that pain starts to go away, is it because of the topical or is it because it's just been 10 minutes and the soreness is starting to go away? Or am I experiencing the feeling of pain to a lesser extent because I expect the topical to work? So there's this whole thing about the placebo effect where I'm like, all right, topicals work. And I hit my knee and it hurts and I'm going to put a topical on it. And then a few minutes later, I'm like, oh, it feels a lot better. Is that because the topical was actually in there doing something chemically? Was it because it's just been 10 minutes and so the pain has subsided? Is it because I expected the pain to subside after I used the topical? And so I'm experiencing that? Now, a lot of folks who study the placebo effect and pain would say, who cares? Right? I mean, you're not hurting yourself by putting the topical on. So whether it was actually the topical or if it was time or if it was the placebo effect, as long as you're feeling less pain, who cares why it happened? It happened, right? So it becomes hard to really measure the effects of a topical specifically because pain is such a subjective experience. So again, we go back to the difficulty in doing research in this area on human subjects. So I actually attended a symposium yesterday about cannabis research, and one of the researchers there studies topicals. And he said that they wanted to do a study looking at topical absorption into the skin and how long it took and what happened once it got in there. And he said they applied for a grant in order to do that. And the federal government said that they had to apply for the investigational new drug program in order to study topicals. So they basically had to create a whole new drug out of a topical and get it approved by the federal government before they could even use it for research. So they said, you know what? We just decided we were going to look at rats instead of people because we didn't need to go through that, all those barriers. So even though we're talking about a topical, and even though we're talking about the fact that it's not psychoactive and these are products that people can access in dispensaries or get from home, or there's CBD topicals that you can order anywhere, it's still really difficult to do controlled studies of human subjects where we see the cause and effect of using topicals.
So, what about skin conditions? I know a lot of people suffer from like eczema and psoriasis, and we did talk about CBD being beneficial for that as an anti-inflammatory. And then I know some people have used it for arthritis and said that they do get relief. So, what do you know about that?
Well, like I said, there's very promising research out there. There's a lot more research that needs to be done. Cannabinoids do have anti-inflammatory properties. They have anti-itch properties. They have antiseptic properties. So looking at things like wound care and healing, they can promote faster healing. So there is a lot of promise out there for cannabinoids being used topically. And again, because we're talking about something that doesn't get you high, if I'm playing a football game and I injure myself and I injure my elbow, in a play and I come back to the sidelines, using a cannabis topical in that moment to help prevent inflammation from happening can be really helpful. And it's not going to get you high, but we need so much more research to really dial in what type of topical, how it's applied, what the concentration of cannabinoids need to be. And, unfortunately, we're just not there yet, even though there's still very little risk to using topicals because they don't get you high. The biggest risk is that they just aren't going to work.
Okay, so what I'm sure everybody out there right now is thinking, see these things all the time, everywhere I go. And of course, I don't recommend just buying anything off the shelf. So if someone is at a dispensary and they're looking for a topical, what should they be looking for?
Well, first I say good luck. Unfortunately, topicals and other non-smoked, non-edible items, non-intoxicating items are starting to disappear more and more from dispensary shelves. At this point, you may be more lucky finding a CBD topical at a place like Whole Foods or ordering one online. That being said, full spectrum is going to be best if you can find it, right? So the CBD is going to help with inflammation. The THC is going to be helping with pain. So finding something that has both THC and CBD is really important. And there are some great companies out there. Green Bee Botanicals is one, Papa and Barkley is another, that have some really great topical products out there. So if you have access to them, I would highly recommend trying to find something that's full spectrum. And another thing to look for is that some topicals have other ingredients in them, like arnica, which can help with pain. So you might be able to compound the effect of the cannabinoids by having other herbs in the topicals that also help with pain and inflammation.
Yeah, that's great. I like Bluebird Botanicals. They have one, and I like the scent because the scent is very important. So, all right, well, that's a deep dive into cannabis topicals. So that takes us to the end. Whether you're slathering on a balm for sore muscles or you're just testing out CBD infused lotion, now you have an idea of what's really going on below the surface. So if you have a topical tale of your own or even a burning question, don't hesitate to drop us a line at info@mypersonalplants.com. We would love to hear from you, and we love to bring your questions so that others can hear them too. Don't forget to explore our YouTube Garden of Wisdom for more plant-powered insights. And we're on every podcast platform now. So you have no excuse. You can get this information whenever you need it. And if you do like our content, please do us a favor and share. It means the world to us when you do love our content and share it, because our goal really is to share this information with more people. So until next time, stay curious, stay green, and keep those questions coming.